Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Kretschmer, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Universal Women's Network and Woman of Inspiration Awards. This is the Woman of Inspiration podcast, where we interview women making an impact locally, nationally, and globally. We're interviewing the trailblazers who ignore the naysayers and take the road less traveled. And with me today is the 2019 Woman of Inspiration Award recipient for Humanitarian Award, Sharilyn Amy. So Sharilyn, you're calling in from Argentina today. So a lot has happened. Let's put the date on the record that it is March 20th, 2020. And we had this date booked in the calendar, and a lot has happened in the past 2 weeks with this COVID, the coronavirus, how it's impacted everybody globally. So we're having a conversation in the green room about that. I'd like to talk about that and where we are. But before we get into it, how did you end up in Argentina? Where do you want to start?
Well, that's a great question. Where to start? I can start with saying, I'm going to do my really best to be sparkly and on today, but with all of what's been happening to the travel industry that's affected our little eco boutique hotel down in Patagonia and the guests that we're trying to care for, anyone watching this will know now that most of the world is in quarantine, and many people have had a lot of their plans disrupted, and there's been a lot of confusion and a lot of fear in our societies as of late. So we've been working really hard this last week on that and not getting a lot of sleep. So I'll do my best to sound coherent as I speak to you from Buenos Aires, where the entire country of Argentina is currently in quarantine. How did I end up down here? I'd spent many years working for the Red Cross in international disaster response, which I must say, all those skills have been re-triggered as of late. And after working in that field for a while, I had my children, and it became difficult to do disaster response missions. So I ended up working as a consultant in the area of social enterprise and community economic development, trying to help folks that are disenfranchised, attached to the workforce, and build their resiliency so they could be contributing members to our communities. And I had an opportunity about 8 years ago to move down to Argentina with my family, and I chose to do so. And I found a project down here that really lit me up. After working for 12 years as a consultant and really enjoying those projects, I missed having muddy boots, as we used to call it in disaster response. And so I started working with a bunch of families in the Andes Mountains that were subsistence goat farmers, and a friend of mine who was running a horse tourism project. So I went on a trip with them and then decided that this would be a really great project to support the development of that business and see what kind of positive economic impact we could have in those small communities. So that kind of reignited my desire to get my hands dirty again. And not long after, I had an opportunity to build in the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Peninsula Valdez, to build a hotel on the beach overlooking this pristine bay where all the southern right whales come in to breed and to have their babies.
Amazing. And it flows so effortlessly, of course, then that's the next step that I decided to do, so let's go back to, your experiences, your early experiences with the Red Cross. And, that really, those adventures, those experiences probably really shaped who you are and where you are right now doing the work that you're doing. So maybe you can share a little bit about what even led you into that area.
Sure. And I just want to take a second to do a big shout out for the work of the Red Cross and all of the, not only humanitarian workers, but the medical teams that are assisting our communities right across the board right now. Just today, we lost a Red Cross volunteer who was working in Italy and at the front lines of the COVID crisis. So this work is some of the most critical And many of the people in our communities involved with the Red Cross are doing so on a volunteer basis. I was an employee with them at the time, working with our teams of volunteers and working with the Red Cross organizations in China, actually, in Wuhan. I know the city well. And after that in Bangladesh, and then also from Geneva, all different years, these projects. And I think the motivation for that kind of work started for me fairly early on. I had an uncle, I still have, thank goodness, my Uncle Jim worked for CUSO, which was Canadian University Students Overseas, back in the 70s when I was a child. And so he was inspirational to me. He sent us postcards from his work in Papua New Guinea. And I realized through living vicariously through his experience that there was just a whole great big world out there and a bunch of different ways that we could contribute to it meaningfully. As I grew up as a teenager, I was a really headstrong teenager in a typical, family environment, and I ended up being living outside of my family unit for a while in the streets of Abbotsford, and in British Columbia. And when I was going through that moment of vulnerability as a teenager, it was really some of the poorest and poorest people with the least amount of resources that helped me out at that time of a significant need, actually. And so I really learned then at this moment in time in my life that our prejudgments that we have socially of people based on their status or their earnings or, what they're doing with their time can be overtly biased. And there's a lot more to each human than what we see on the outside. And that people who even though they might not be attached necessarily to the workforce or looking successful as we might consider or measure, they still have a lot to offer our communities if we give them an opportunity to do so. And so that piece really rung with me. So those two things, my uncle's experience and then my own personal experience of getting help from people that really didn't have a lot to give, but still shared anyway. It lit up in my mind that my calling really was to pay forward the kindnesses that I've been shown in a way that had meaningful impact. And so when I first was educated, I ended up starting my career in oil and gas, as many people do in Calgary, and was really grateful for that experience. But fairly early on in my career, I had an opportunity to hop on over to the Canadian Red Cross, and I chose to do that. It wasn't the smartest move from a money perspective by far, but it was a much more easy to align my values and the kind of impact that I wanted to have through their work.
So let me go back to, you've painted a couple really big things that I want to touch on right now. Sharilyn, is number one, thank you for identifying, the shout out to all the workers right now. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, how timely this interview is. Yeah. And how that I hope that people that are, connected to the people that have been on the front lines, that are volunteering, actually, know how much gratitude we have for them. And for the people that are listening, maybe that sparks that circle of reciprocity, that reach out to go, hey, let's do some sort of shout out to them. So that's number one. Number two is that I believe that every woman has a story, and we're in this global economic crisis right now. And there is so much uncertainty going on. But what I see very clearly was the adversity that you had, that you experienced, you've turned in such a beautiful way that's actually kind of carved a path for your future that's very deeply meaningful. So maybe I can just have you touch on that a little bit, because when we go through the experiences at that time, we're stuck, and sometimes we can't see outside to see the beauty that comes from the adversity.
Right. That's a really good question. When I was working as a consultant in Go-To Group, and a lot of my clients were in the social services sector, in the nonprofit NGO sector, working with youth at risk. And that's what I was at that time, a youth at risk. But I had never been very public about that history, because I had a lot of, still a lot of processing to do of those experiences myself, but also a lot of self-judgment on how people might view a professional who had that kind of experience in their background. Because it was a very disruptive time. You know, I barely made it out of high school because of that, and it took me a while to stabilize my living environment in a way that I could return to post-secondary. I then returned and I went on to my master's, my MBA, etc., because I loved being a student and was a good one. But it wasn't the traditional path that many people took. And so not very long into my consulting career, I was at a conference in Calgary where we had gathered, I think, over 300 people who worked in social services. And they were talking about the frustration they were having in their programming around street youth. And I can't even remember what the question was, but something spurred me to speak to it. And of course, in a big room, you stand up and you speak to your point and sat down. And I don't even remember the details at that point, but I realized at that moment that I had disclosed my history. And I sat completely frozen in place until the break. And then I went out to the foyer and a bit shocked because I thought, oh boy, there's a lot of clients of mine here. Over 9 of my clients were there. At that point, my consultancy had 4 other consultants working with it. So, you know, I was sort of the rainmaker, the face of the consultancy, but a lot of other people had we worked together very collaboratively, but we really relied on one another. And I just was a little shaken because I wasn't sure how that was going to play. And, you know, in a matter of moments, I had 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 people come over and say, can you please tell us more about that story? And I realized that at that moment, I realized that we need to start owning all of the story that gets us to where we are, you know, because there wasn't judgment, there was curiosity. Mm. And I think oftentimes our inner voices take that path that actually there'll be judgment or criticism when really what might come at you is what came at me that day is curiosity, which is what made the difference for you as a street youth. How is it that you survived that and created what you've created versus other kids who don't? What are the pieces that we need to be looking at as people working to assist vulnerable youth? Those are great questions, and I didn't have any magic answers, but what I do believe was a key learning for me in that time, and this is absolutely fundamental to how I live my life now, is that what we seem to be seeing is that if one adult shows an interest, a genuine interest in youth that have been disenfranchised like that, there can be a pivotal changing point for that young person. So it's not like it needs to be anything heroic either. It doesn't necessarily need to be you know, lifting them from the street and creating a grand opportunity and paying over education. It doesn't need to be that at all, but it does need to be a genuine commitment and interest in their capacity as a human being. And I think for me, I really credit that to my uncle again, because he did see in me what my potential was outside of the circumstances that I was living at the moment. We didn't cross paths very often, but it was enough of an influence for me to realize that you're much more than your circumstances. Even at 15 and 16, when this was happening to me, I knew that voice strongly. I'm more than my circumstances. And that's been an underlying piece for all of the work that I've done ever since. Every single person I work with, they're much more than their circumstances. And I know how powerful I can be as an influence in their future if I'm going to be present with them now. And that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of coaching and a lot of, we take a lot of interns. Every year I have an intern or 2 working with me in whatever projects I'm working on at the time. And usually they're 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. And it's a complete joy for me to hang out and be a guide and to learn from them as well, because there's not a single young person who hasn't sat across from me and taught me buckets. They're so far ahead of us, not just in technology, but in a lot of different ways that they view the world compared to myself at almost 50, you know. So it's been a total recambio, like it's not just me paying out. I get a lot back out of it. That sounds very cliche, but it's incredibly true. So anyone who does any form of mentoring and does it well from the heart recognizes that.
So there's so many things wrapped around this, and it's all about your story. We talk about woman of inspiration and what makes a woman of inspiration. And I think that vulnerability is such a core piece of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, in order to get to that vulnerability, you have to be able to tell your story. And I'm going to share that it's a process for people when they make the application. I've had so many women say, I've never, ever shared my story before.
Yeah.
And being so completely surprised by the response to being exactly how you said, the people that are really listening and wanting to learn more are not the ones that they're not judging. They're actually curious,
Yeah.
and they're in awe of the strength. So, you know, why do you think it's so hard for us to tell that story?
Oh, I think it's absolutely how we've been culturalized as women. And there's lots of research behind this as well, you know. So for me, I'll speak to my own experiences. For me, we are rewarded throughout our lives as young girls all the way up to, you know, be cute and not too smart and sweet and all of those things. But the minute that you're loud or aggressive or strong, those things are shushed and poo-pooed, you know, by the adults around us. And it's not because, you know, I don't think it's done with bad intentions, any of that. It's just they've been culturalized that way as well. So I think women have a hard time. This idea of bragging is a really hard thing for us to do. We're often apologizing when we're bragging. I have a format that I use oftentimes when I have a group of women together. Thankfully, I have many wonderful groups of women, and one of the formats is tell us a brag, tell us a concern or something that you're working through right now, and tell us a wish for the future, something like that. And you know that the hardest part for them is the brag, so I usually have to do a bit of a framework around it, which is this is a completely safe place for a brag, and there's no need to apologize for your wins, for what you're proud of, because often that's exactly what they do. Well, it's kind of, but not really. I mean, it's just a bit of all these little words that we use to take away from our achievements. And that's something that I see less of that in the generation of my daughter, who's turning 18 soon. I see a lot less of that. So I think this next generation coming up has chosen to not take on that socialized burden of belittling and making smaller their light in order to make other people comfortable. And I try really hard to model that as well. But it's a practice, because we were raised learning how to say, I'm sorry, but would you mind, all the time. When really what we need to say is, actually what I believe to be true here is this. And we need to own that piece and stand quite firmly on our own feet, because I think now more than ever before, the type of leadership that women bring to the table is absolutely critical. We synthesize things quickly. We carry a variety of different opinions and ideas at the same time. And we tend to be very much in tune to what the community needs in order to flourish. And a lot of that comes from the fact that many of us, luckily, are mothers. And so I think it was about 15, 20 years ago when I was working with
I'm just going to get you to, I'm just going to get you to, let's check the sound to make sure that we're perfect. I think there's just a little, I want to make sure you've got so much interesting, perfect, wherever that was, maybe just sit a little bit closer.
Am I talking to
quietly?
There
How
we go.
unusual.
This is talking
great. Yeah, this is great stuff. I was just losing you a little bit, and
no. Here I am talking about how women have to be more firm in what they're having to say.
Okay, perfect.
Is that better?
Yeah.
You can edit it out or leave it in. This is
I'm gonna leave it in. We're gonna roll with it. We're rolling with it. Enough about perfection. Seriously.
Oh, absolutely. There was a fellow speaking to the response related to this pandemic, and he's like, our big mistake is trying to be sure we don't make a mistake, and that's 100% right. I learned that in the field as well. you know.
Mm.
It's not about perfection. It's about jumping in and making the decision to get in, and then doing the best you can from there, because it's this iterative process of what we're learning as we're going on. Those circles of iteration are getting tighter and closer. And that's good in the environments that we're having, because the environments we're working in are a lot more complex. And so I think I was in the process of saying, I think women bring a unique set of skills to this form of leadership that our communities need right now for that capacity. And we tend to be quite tuned in to at a community level because of our roles as women, as nurturers, and as mothers. And I learned that when I was working many years ago for the Red Cross, because we would, if we targeted, what we learned was this: if we taught a mother how to speak English, she would teach her children. You know, if we loaned money to the woman head of the household, the money would get returned. And that's been borne out in other programs and other studies as well. So I don't want to sound sexist, and there's lots of incredible men who I've worked with in my life, my business partner being one of them, one of the most inspiring people that I know, Marcela Batidana, who owns Oceano Patagonia with me. But each of us brings quite a unique set of skills, and now we're coming into a future where that set of leadership skills that are very unique to women are critically important, I think.
And I do see the shift happening, and I think you talk about your daughter's generation because she's looking to her mom for leadership. And, you know, like we're still
well, she won't admit it, you know, she's 17, so I don't know that she'd go for that.
Well, I would have to think that she was pretty darn proud of you when you were nominated and when you won Woman of Inspiration. So, you know, experiencing that, what did that feel like to be recognized, you know, to walk in and step into that spotlight? How did it feel to be acknowledged?
Well, first I want to thank you for creating that forum for everybody. I think that it opens up a huge opportunity for all of us as women to talk about these critical issues, and it elevates the dialogue right across the board, because there's such great publicity farther out in the community for all of that. And so first off, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think I found it very useful to me in the work that I'm already doing in our communities, in the speaking that I'm already doing, to leverage that profile that was gained through this award for the message. It's to me, it's much more about the message around our responsibilities to one another, and trying to create environments that don't leave people behind. And so that's why I'm most grateful, because it's given me a chance to speak more to that in different rooms where maybe I would not have had the opportunity to do so before. One of the challenges that we faced when we were building down in Oceano was fighting the corruption that is inherent in many construction-related projects globally, not just in Argentina. I don't want to point a finger to South America, because we have these problems in Canada as well. And you know, just after the award, I had an opportunity to speak to a big group of women down here about what our experience had been working with the Department of Justice and doing an undercover operation to out the people that had been harassing and threatening us.
So you were undercover?
My business partner was, he and I had to make a decision to do that, and he was wired and in meetings with, you know, surrounded by secret police, filming everything to try to get the documentation they needed to be able to press charges. So we were hand in hand in all of that, because we had to both take that decision for the risk also that was involved in it. And I'm happy to say they were able to charge the people involved. And in their further investigations, they found that one of the people involved is also involved in child pornography. So they're bringing forward further charges based on that. And there's been lots of times when we questioned whether or not being involved in that sting operation was worth it, because the amount of stress it causes civilian, I'm just a civilian, my business partners as well, to participate in an investigation like that is beyond the scale. You don't have an idea and what you're getting into when you get into it, and then once you're in it, it's too late to get out. But the fact is, prosecutors don't have a case unless they've got willing civilians to participate. And what you see, like what we saw, is that these folks that are involved in organized crime and corruption, you know, once you start to pull the string, you see that they're attached to a whole bunch of other things, and this is child pornography. So the day that the prosecutor called us to let us know that those charges were going to be coming down the pipe, that was probably the first day where we both thought, okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it costs us. It's entirely worth it to get this really awful human being out of the game. So that investigation is continuing, and we're hoping to see further charges come down against other people. They've uncovered a complete ring of people involved, so we've got our fingers crossed. But we're using that experience, and we're using the awards like what I gained through Women of Inspiration and others to have a broader conversation. You know, we've been speaking with the OECD, who's responsible globally for anti-corruption. We've been speaking with the FBI. We've been talking to them all about the case study of us, which is this small business and the targeting that would happen for us. Because a lot of what we see in the anti-corruption movement is the big stories, you know. And the fact is, I think it's something like 90% of the world's business is all done through small business. So we need their targeting and their training and their earning their bread and butter from groups like us, small and without a lot of resources and without a big network of, you know, of organizations. And there's a reason they keep winning. They keep winning because they're organized. Organized crime truly is very, very well organized. And, you know, small businesses for the other side aren't. They're just busy just, you know, trying to get your business going. And
they're very vulnerable because they don't have the bankroll in order to fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this has been a big message, and I've been grateful for the award to help us get that message out there as well. To the people involved in anti-corruption, which is to say we need to make it more secure for civilians to participate. We need to understand more deeply what it means psychologically, physically, emotionally for them to be involved and to take care of them after their involvement. And then to speak to the small business community, well, and the larger business community too, which is, you know, none of this stops unless we stop it. So we've got to be brave. We've got to stop turning a blind eye, and we have to be very, very aggressive and very brave. And it's truly is brave is the key word there. You need to be very brave. We were involved all the way up to the Ministry of Security here related to issues in this investigation. So I'm grateful that it's closed. I'm grateful people are going to trial. And I'm grateful that we had a chance to play that kind of a role, you know, in something significant.
Well, I'm glad that you have the opportunity to now share with it. I know that when you were in Calgary for the awards, there was all of this going on, but it was something where you couldn't really even talk about it. Like what, you know, it's like, you know, this great big something is happening that you're part of, something so big, but you can't even talk about it. So
yeah.
So
the charges were coming down. The charges were coming down that very week that I saw you. So, I mean, we knew what was coming down, but we couldn't say a word because they were doing raids on houses and things like that. So, yeah, it was surreal, absolutely surreal. Yeah, there's a book in there somewhere, I think.
I think so too. I really do. I think that, you know, every woman has a story. And I think that's what's so interesting is that these situations prepare you for situations that we're experiencing right now. You know, the adversity, I look at the coping mechanisms that we have. We've built a resistance. You're like, okay, I thrive in adversity, you know, and, you know, I see that myself. I'm like, okay, I know how to cope. I've got through stuff before, big stuff, and I've thrived through it. Now, it's almost like you go into this fight or flight mode, but you kind of go, okay, I know what I need to do, and you check the boxes off, and it's like a completely different situation, but your toolkit is already built. So I think that the adversity that we actually experience in our life, I think everyone has got some sort of level in that.
Yes,
If we
absolutely.
just draw on that to move us through what we're moving through right now, it's going to help us all. Do you agree?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's this, I make this delineation often to people, it's not about panic, it's about plan. So if you feel that sense of anxiety or panicking coming up, there's an issue around self-care that we need to have, breathe it out, get centered, figure out where it's coming from, and then just take hold of those reins and plan, don't panic. And that helps us get to the other side. And I think the more often you've done that, the bigger your resilience is, as you were saying, and the more tools you have to do so. And I think the other piece that I'm gaining now is also the compassion side of it, to recognize that, yeah, everyone has their story, but we all come into each situation with a variety of different life experiences and perspectives. So I see that happening right now with the way people are reacting to this global pandemic. Some people are flippant about it, other people are really strict and isolated, being quarantined, as I am. And the thing is it's about, and some people are quite panicked, quite anxious, and sometimes that comes out as anger. And so we just need to kind of hold space without that judgment for one another, to let people process and understand that, we all want the same outcome, and we all have a different set of skills to get us there, and how can we help each other along in that process, because creating safety for our families and our communities, and then recuperating economically from this disaster is what we all want. So how do we make that happen in support of one another, not running into the friction between one another? And that takes effort. And so I think those of us that have had a lot of skill and experience in that, that next step of empathy and compassion for others to help them along that process, and to do so in honor of what their strengths are and not in judgment, is a big piece of that next generation of learning for us.
And I'm going to pause us right here. Okay, I want to check for just a moment. Okay, so we're back, and we just paused for a brief moment just to connect, just to make sure that our internet was working, because we talked about just over the mass like overload on Facebook and Zoom and all of the social media right now. Everybody's Zooming and Facebooking and LinkedIning. So, to finish a couple of the other points I want to talk to you about is, you had mentioned you have a co-founder, a business, so not a co-founder, but a business partner. So I want to talk about the importance of our male allies. If you can maybe shed some light on that, because I really do believe it's important as we move forward, talk about the support hers in our life.
Sure. I'd love to, because, I'm a strong advocate for women, but I'm an enormously strong advocate for men also. I mentioned earlier about the women's role in leadership and what we bring to the table. And I feel the same way with men. Men have a wonderful strength and quality that they bring to the table. I was really lucky. Marcelo is actually a co-founder of Oceana Patagonia with me. He built that hotel with me. And in fact, I don't think the project would have been successful without his involvement. His strengths and my strengths combined to be fairly formidable together. And he's quite gifted in pursuing really difficult pieces right to their final end. And we've had moments, we've worked together so closely, so long, and in such unusual circumstances, between building this eco hotel with sustainable technology in the middle of Patagonia on the ocean is in itself an almost insurmountable challenge. And to do that, fighting corruption, and to get the whole project running, and to start a brand that never existed, and create an experience for our guests that people can read about on TripAdvisor, and it's extraordinary. And to do so in a way where we really wanted to make a statement to the community around what it means to do community economic development, what it means to build sustainability, and to protect the special environment where we find ourselves in the middle of this world-renowned wildlife reserve. He was game for all of that. And you really need to have a particular backbone to take all of that on, and at the same time, share your sense of vulnerability when it came to our role in the anti-corruption fight. he's the one that really is at much more risk than I am, because he's from here and he's Argentine, and it's not like if things go sideways, he can leave the country. I always have that option as a foreigner and as a Canadian. I'm a committed immigrant here in Argentina. I've invested in the country and created jobs, but this is his home. You know, his children are in university here. So he was, I think often, and I am inspired often by his bravery over this last few years. And that's a good thing to remember, because in any business partnership, you have days when you want to kill each other. So on those days, I think deeply about the great human I know is behind that stubbornness. I think deeply about that. And I think I find gratefulness and gratitude for his stubbornness as well.
Very cool. And I think that it does take a lot of heads. I know you choose your people in your world that, you know, you all play on your strengths. That's how we work together, right? So not everybody knows everything. And once you figure that out, the better off you are. So now, you know, I'm going to talk about right now, before we end the call, about right now, where we are today, March 20th, 2020.
Right.
And, you know, it's a really surreal feeling how quickly things have escalated in the past 2 weeks. But businesses around the world, our schools are closed. Your country is on lockdown. Our country has just closed the borders between Canada and the US. And this is only really escalated on such a magnitude that is far beyond our comprehension. Like not even like 9 days ago, March 11th, 2020 was when the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic. Yeah. And I'm thinking back to celebrating International Women's Day on March 8th, and people are still social gathering. And the week before that, it was Super Bowl. So, I mean, this is amazing. It's impacted everybody. That's why we're so connected, because we're all feeling that same pain. But what can we do to help and support each other? Like, you know, and this is not just a localized conversation. This is just each around the world.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that question, because, I mean, first off, I want to tell you I'm a huge proponent of the stay-at-home movement, social isolation piece. All my years working for Red Cross, I can tell you that none of our countries have moved fast enough. And so we really, all of us need to take the individual responsibility to care for not infecting people who are more vulnerable. And what we know about this virus changes every day, and it's going to continue to change every day. But what they think they know up to this point is the number of people who are infected but are asymptomatic, meaning they're showing no symptoms, is between 5 to 8 for every one person infected. And we know we're not counting everyone infected because we don't have enough tests at this moment. So one thing is for sure, there's a risk, even if you think you're healthy. And the risk is less to you and I because of our age and our health, and much more to the people who are our grandparents, or who are like my daughter, who is asthmatic, people who have other forms of vulnerability. And so there's a couple of key messages, and one of them is to please, in this time, I know it seems hard to like hang out in your pajamas and save the world by watching Netflix every day or whatever you might be doing with your time, but please do that, and also prepare yourself that it's going to be longer. It's going to be longer than the 14 days or the 2 weeks, whatever it is they might be saying. That's where the word quarantine comes from 40, right? So that used to be 39 days was what was needed to shut something down like this. So we need to just get our heads around that. And then as a business person, and this has been a lot of the pushback, and unfortunately a lot of the hesitance around governments to take the drastic steps that they needed to take to slow down the infection, to flatten the curves, as we've all been talking about, is the impact on the economy. And I think that this is going to be considered a before and after event. You know, the way the world was before and the way the world now is. And there's going to be a really long road ahead, particularly for small to medium-sized enterprises. There's a varying degree of business continuity support coming from different governments. Here in Argentina, I don't suspect we're going to see much. And so I've spent my last week trying to figure out how to keep my employees safe and how to keep them paid so they can put food on the table. But as a small business person, it's taking everything I've got to maintain that, knowing that I'm probably not going to have guests in my hotel until perhaps even July if I'm lucky. So what I'm telling people to do is to really put an effort into supporting their small businesses. If it means buying gift certificates from them now in the hopes of using them when they reopen in the future, that's this cash flow piece right now for small businesses is critical. So if you've got the capacity, number one, it's not a question. Please stay at home. Number two, if you've got the financial capacity, please take a look around and decide how you can keep your money in the community and support the small business owners. Because they're family businesses like me, and if they're lucky, they employ other people. So it's just little families that you're helping in that case. And then I think the third piece that we really have, and you and I've touched on it a bit already, is just this level of compassion and gratitude. Gratitude I have because I have a roof over my head and internet so I can work and speak to you and connect on Zoom with my girlfriends for support. And there's just a whole lot of people in this world that do not have that right now. They're facing all the same fears that you and I might have, and they don't have any of these resources. So that's that compassion piece. And I'm sure in your community, as in mine, there's different ways that we can get involved to make a difference in the lives of people who are a lot more vulnerable than we are.
So I'm going to recap. Ditto on all three. Stay at home, stay at home, stay at home. The quicker we can do that, the quicker we can get on with it, fingers crossed. Support the small businesses that are in your community. And if you have the financial capacity, support the small businesses that are struggling, because it all comes back. They will be so grateful. You will have loyalty upon loyalty upon loyalty, and be compassion. Like practice compassion and gratitude and empathy, and a little bit of praying every day won't, like meditating and positive thoughts. If everybody could just, before you go to bed at night and when you wake up in the morning, say, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for, the blue sky and the sunshine or whatever you can find, because I think that sends a message as well, right? If we consume ourselves in this impact where we can't breathe, it's going to get so heavy that we're not going to be able to breathe. So let's just go out, smell the fresh air, and be grateful for that, because the sky's there. Nobody's taking away the sky or the sunshine.
Yeah, and that piece you're speaking to really is about that self-care, and we talk about that in the disaster response, emergency response community. It's so critical, that self-care, putting on that mask on yourself first. So if you're waking up feeling a lot of anxiety, taking that time to just breathe your way through it and to source it and do some planning around addressing what's causing you anxiety. That's really critical right now, so that then we can go on to help others.
So I have a question to you. So as I'm just kind of thinking about that compassion project, like I think that we should just create a compassion project where everybody can contribute all over the world, where people that are frontline can go on and look at it, and maybe we can, have something on Facebook where we do a compassion project page, where we just get people downloading gratitude for the people that are front lines and sharing the story. So it's all in one spot, and those people can look there and find pieces that they can be grateful for.
Sure.
I'm just looking for ways that we can, practice it ourselves, but also pay it forward to make others feel appreciative and, that what they're doing has value and worth.
Yeah. And another great thing that people can be doing right now is from a compassionate place is taking a survey in their neighborhood. So for me, my neighborhood's not just my neighbors here, but say you have a WhatsApp group or Facebook group or a group with girlfriends from your book club. Just taking a look at what resilience there is there and what skills there are in the group. Maybe one's a doctor, one's a nurse, has, and what vulnerabilities are on the group. So that as this challenge drags on and perhaps our public health care systems get more destabilized or more stressed, You know, should you have an accident in your kitchen and need some help to mend a finger when you've been cutting vegetables, you've got someone else to call other than our main lines. And should you have friends or neighbors that have a form of vulnerability that maybe you didn't know of before, then you can have in your mind that perhaps on day 14 it's worth giving them a call to make sure that their medication has got what they need, that they've got someone to call. So that whole compassion piece can start really close to home also with our actions, and can help build the resilience of our whole community by looking at that, identifying our strengths that we have and the people that we touch. Well, don't touch them now, but you know what I mean, the people that are in our networks, and helping identify those weaknesses and taking ownership as a community to care for them.
Well, I think those are wonderful comments. I just love being able to have these authentic conversations with you. I thought, wow, how timely it is that we're talking right now when you've had all that experience on the front line, you know, with the Red Cross and, you know, the disaster relief, and, you know, you yourself experiencing on both ends as a business owner and on the front lines, being involved with some of these really global issues that are happening. So I hope that everything, you know, I'm going to say I'm an optimist. I believe that we need to think forward. I know that we're planning Woman of Inspiration for 2020. I don't think we can't stop recognizing. I have to stay in my lane and push forward, and just, you know, even if people think I'm a little nutso for thinking that we're going to do this award still this year, I think it's critical because we're going to have so many people to recognize that are really deserving of recognition, that I just feel that that's my path right now, is that I have to push forward that no matter what. So thank you so much for talking with us and sharing your experiences. I know it's hard to talk about, you know, your personal journeys, but I think that more we do, the more you inspire others to talk about theirs. It's really beautiful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are so welcome. And this is not going to be the end of the conversation. We'll have more. And for those of you listening, you know, we're going to be, if would you like to do a little plug on where we can find you in Argentina when all the borders, and where we know where we can travel to a beautiful eco-friendly
I'm a business owner,
and travel to and stay your property?
Oceano Patagonia. So you can find us on the internet and on TripAdvisor, on Booking.com. Oceano is O-C-E-A-N-O, Patagonia, just like you know how to spell it. So that's where you can find us, or you can Google my name, Sharilyn Amy, and you'll come across that and the other projects that I'm involved in as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for taking your time out. I know that you've got a lot of work ahead of you, and I hope that this was inspiring for you as it was for me to talk, to have this personal connection. And I wish you nothing but success, smooth sailing. I know the road is going to be a little rocky, but I hope that with our relationships that we have and our circles that we have, we can get through it together.
You betcha. I believe it completely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care. And everyone, thank you so much for listening to the Woman of Inspiration podcast. This is Monica Kretschmer. For the notes and all of the links to Sharilyn's wonderful eco-friendly boutique hotel, it will be in the links here provided. So thank you so much for joining, and we welcome all of your comments and